Welcome to Faith Vocals. My name is Faith. We've been doing a series on this channel about truth, about what the definition of truth is, and this is the fourth and I think probably the last video that I'll be doing on the subject. The first video on this subject was talking specifically about what the definition of truth is. I think most people intuitively understand truth to mean what aligns with reality, right? Or I've heard the definition fidelity to the original. So in other words, there's an idea that there's a reality out there and it's not true if whatever we're saying doesn't match up to that reality. But I've heard of a few others, so I mentioned them in the first definition. One that I've heard of is it's not true if it doesn't match up with my existing beliefs. There are people like that. I guess maybe we've met people like that, people who you can't convince, can't persuade, because whatever you're saying, as much as it might line up with reality, just doesn't line up with their original beliefs. So I don't know if they understand themselves to hold that view of truth, that truth must cohere with their existing beliefs. But definitely we see people who practice that. There's another group of people who think that truth is whatever is most useful to believe. So it maybe doesn't necessarily line up with reality, but is more useful to believe one thing than even reality. I guess maybe if the understanding that your situation is so dire, there's nothing you can do to survive. If you're faced with that reality, then someone might argue, well, that you can't believe that. Don't consider that to be truth. Consider it that you can fight anyway. You get it told by a doctor, listen, I've never seen anyone beat this cancer. You've got a couple weeks to live. Don't believe, the pragmatist would say, don't believe that. The truth is that you can keep fighting. You can keep winning. Maybe you'll be the first one to live. And so there are people who would hold truth to that standard of how useful is it opposed to reality. I'm of course one who believes that truth corresponds to reality, which is kind of interesting because I'm a Christian, and a lot of people have the idea that Christians don't believe that truth corresponds with reality, or at least what they say is, what they seem to think is that we deny things like science and logic and reason because we're so diehard holding on to our Bible and our beliefs. So then the question would be, how does this view of truth corresponding with reality fit with being a Christian? So the next series that I did was, the next video in the series that I did was talking about what the Bible says about truth, and especially what Jesus said about truth. I had to shorten my scope a bit because already with just what Jesus says about truth, the video was 1 hour and 20 minutes long. And I'm trying to get my videos shorter. But talking about what Jesus said and what that implies about what truth is. And then last week I was looking at the question of how do we even know that what we're believing is true? So we have this belief. What is our standard for saying that this belief is true? And well, maybe our senses, maybe empirical knowledge is true. Maybe if you can see it and touch it, then you know it's true. But then again, how do we trust our senses? Maybe it's logic. Maybe logic helps us define the truth. And logic certainly seems to be a great tool. I think we'll see that a little bit in what I'm planning today. But the problem is, one of the rules of logic is that you have to know that all of your premises are true. Now, there's different types of logic. There's the deductive logic, which is what I'm referring to. There's inductive logic, where you can kind of incorporate possibilities, but that doesn't even get you to the truth. It just tells you what's possible. And there's abductive logic, which is kind of a combination of the two. You're seeing out of the results you have, out of the reality you have in front of you, then what is the most likely conclusion you can make about what came before? What is the most likely cause for this effect? But even then, you have to have omniscience about all of the factors that go into what it is that you're examining. A new piece of evidence can derail everything. So logic even doesn't seem to get us totally to the truth. And my conclusion, of course, maybe you'd think this would, maybe you're not surprised, but my conclusion is we need a source of truth that is omniscient, that is always going to tell the truth, that can never be mistaken. And we need to have from that source what the truth is. So that source needs to actually speak to us about what the truth is. And for Christians, that source is God. I didn't get into, by the way, truth is information. A belief is information. You write it down and you can convey it in words. I don't know of any non-personal entity that conveys information. Obviously, a book is non-personal, a computer is non-personal, but a person sat down and wrote down that information. You could say, well, we're coming into an era where AI can convey information without someone writing it down. Well, someone coded the AI. Information always comes from a mind. So if we're trying to get down to what beliefs are actually true, and those beliefs are information, we're going to need a mind to convey that information to us. An impersonal source of knowledge is not going to be sufficient to tell us humans what is true and what is not. So that's a bit that I did not remember to include in the last video. So now, I mentioned there are 3-4 different definitions of truth. I mentioned, I recapped today, we have correspondence, that truth corresponds to reality. We have coherence, that truth coheres with existing beliefs. We have pragmatism, that truth is whatever is most pragmatic. I did not mention postmodernism, which is that maybe there's a reality out there, but you and I can't really get a grasp on what that reality is because our senses, our perception actually acts like a wall. We think we know what the truth is, but we can't actually tell that our perceptions are accurate concerning reality. So there's that view also. In the other videos that I've made, I've been saying, well, with what Jesus said, it seems like he's leading us to correspondence theory. Now, maybe there's a little bit of an argument made for pragmatism. I think where you see in the Bible something like Jesus talking about the widow who gave the 2 mites, and he's saying, truly she gave more than all of the rich people who were giving their tithes at the temple. Actually, objectively, she gave 2 mites. They probably gave a lot more than 2 mites. And so, by the way, mite is a unit of currency for Jesus' time. So, is it objectively true that she gave more than the others? She gave a greater percentage of her wealth. Is that what Jesus is conveying? Is it more useful to believe that she gave more so that we have a better heart attitude before God? So someone could make an argument for pragmatism in that case, but in most of the cases where Jesus is speaking, it looks to me like he's saying that truth needs to line up with reality, like when he told the Samaritan woman that she was speaking the truth when she said she had no husband, because actually she had had 5 husbands. I'm not remembering if it was 4 or 5. I think it was 5. And the man she was currently living with was not her husband. So he praised her for telling the truth, which is whatever aligned with reality. I think where pragmatism has a foot up over, say, coherence theory, where truth coheres with our original beliefs, a lot of the time the reality is more pragmatic to believe in. It's more useful to believe in reality than otherwise. So that's, I think that's why we see that in the Bible. Okay, so I took a rabbit trail, got to get back to where we were, the 4 definitions, the 3 theories of truth that I mentioned, and also postmodernism, that we can't perceive reality except for our perceptions actually prevent us from perceiving reality. So coming at what Jesus was saying, okay, it looks like correspondence is winning here. And then in the next video, I was saying, well, I'm going to deal with this subject of how we know what truth is from a correspondence view, from my view, because that's the one I'm more familiar with. Because we really, when we're getting down to what is the definition of truth, what is the true definition of truth? We're kind of shooting ourselves in the foot here, right? Because we have to kind of agree about the way that we're going to discuss the subject before we even come to the decision of how we're going to discuss the subject. We're going to address truth differently if we think it corresponds with reality than if we think it coheres with our existing beliefs, or if we think it is only whatever is most useful to believe. We're going to discuss a different set of objects based on what our definition of truth is. So I just skipped that in the last video. I said, The way I took it was I'm more familiar with correspondence. I'm going to speak about it from correspondence. So I don't want to dodge that issue, though. Should we be seeing truth as corresponding with reality, or should we be giving credence to it coheres with existing beliefs, or it's more pragmatic, or it can't be discerned at all because our perceptions get in the way? And that's a big topic. So I was trying to figure out how do I address this? How do I make a video once a week talking about this subject and keep it short? So actually there is a resource that I am aware of. I've discovered this resource, this website, through a DVD that I purchased. I'm being a Christian, being interested in the reasons for my beliefs, I often purchase material on those reasons. I bought a DVD called How to Answer the Fool. And of course, the Bible takes itself, claims to be the source of truth. And so anyone who doesn't believe in the Bible, according to the Bible, is a fool. So this DVD is talking about how we defend our faith logically, because the creator of this DVD takes logic to be a standard for truth. And even though I said logic is not a valid way to find truth in and of itself, I do agree that if what we're believing doesn't align with logic, then it doesn't align with reality. So I think logic is a good step in that direction. So I have this DVD. Of course, a DVD usually points to a website, and this website, if you want to look it up, we're going to be looking at it today. This website, if you want to look it up, is called proofthatgodexists.org. Don't go to .com. That'll take you to a Bible reading website. That will not take you to the website that I'm intending you to go to. It's proofthatgodexists.org. And even to get into the website, just to get in the front door of the website, you have to take a quiz. So what we're going to do today is we're going to take a quiz, and we're going to see if we make it into the website. So that's my goal for today. So let's have a look at the home page here. So this is the website, not built, I think, to modern web standards, but that's okay. There's a lot of information here. You can get in through the menus, but I'm going to try to get through the front door here. So let's see what happens if we get through the front door. And by the way, just because it's a little bit distracting, you can see the video that I have the DVD to here on the homepage of proofthatgodexists.org if you want. And then they've got another one about a debate that this person who created the website did. So we've got a couple videos there for free if you want to view those. I am not sponsored by this website anyway. In any way. So I just appreciated the content. I thought it was useful to what I wanted to address here. And so we're going to go ahead and use this as a resource for this video. So, and we're keeping in mind, what is the actual definition of truth? Is truth something that we can actually know? Or is truth our existing beliefs? Is truth pragmatism? Does truth line up with reality? So here's our first question, truth. We've got 4 answers we can give. Absolute truth exists. Absolute truth does not exist. I don't know if absolute truth exists. I don't care if absolute truth exists. And they give us a definition. Absolute truth equals truth for all people at all times everywhere. So there is a potential wrong answer to this quiz. So we want to try to avoid the wrong answer. I'll go ahead and give us the wrong answer to start out with, so we see what they do with us when we have the wrong answer. Let's say we just don't care. I don't care if absolute truth exists. So I click that button, and it's taking my computer a while to load it. Price your vote. Disneyland. We're looking at Halloween at Disneyland. What? Okay, if you don't care that truth exists, then you have no place on the site. You're going to be happier at Disneyland. So why don't you go ahead and plan your vacation, and you can come back to the site when you're serious. That's the message I'm picking up from this website. So I actually care if absolute truth exists. I think it's very important So we're going to give the right answer from now on. So absolute truth, truth for all people at all times everywhere. If truth corresponds with reality, then I think there is a shared source of truth, that reality. And so whatever is true for me would be true for someone else. That reality has general principles that work for all people at all times. And so I would say that, yeah, true, there is absolute truth. There's truth for all people at all times everywhere. But let's say that truth corresponds with whatever is most useful to believe. Well, maybe it is useful to all people to believe a particular thing, but a lot of the times the usefulness of a belief changes, right? And in one circumstance, a belief may be useful. At another time, it's not useful. Let's say, for instance, the idea that comes into mind is you should drink water to stay healthy, right? Very useful belief in most cases. But what if you've already drunk an excessive amount of water and you are on the edge of water toxicity? If you drink any more water, then you are going to be poisoned by the amount of water in your body compared to what it should be. Well, then it would not be a useful belief to believe you should drink more water. So in that case, then the pragmatism of that belief changes, and so the truth value of that belief would change. So the pragmatist would not be able to say there is absolute truth, that is true for all people at all times everywhere. Usefulness changes. Likewise, a coherence theorist would say, well, it's true based on my beliefs, but I recognize other people have other beliefs, so what's true to me may not be true to them. So they would not agree with this definition, true for all people at all times everywhere. And then, of course, the postmodernists would say, well, there is no absolute truth because we can't absolutely know that our perception lines up with reality. So at this point, we're still trying to figure out what the definition of truth is. So we're going to have to say we don't know because we're holding all these different views in our head here. Let's say we don't know if absolute truth exists. What's behind this door? I don't know if absolute truth exists. Is that absolutely true or is that false? Well, if I say that I don't know that absolute truth exists, well, that's absolutely true. Okay, I guess we've got an absolute truth, don't we? Because at this moment, it is absolutely true that I don't know. And even if we were to jump to the future, is it true that in 2022, Faith sitting at her computer was saying that she didn't know that absolute truth exists? Well, yeah, that was true at that point of time. Even if we could jump back in time, is it true that in the future, Faith will not know if it's absolutely true if truth exists? If we could jump back in time and ask an ancestor, maybe they wouldn't know that because they don't have any idea who I am. But the fact remains that in the future, there's going to be a young lady who will not know if absolute truth exists. So we could go with absolutely true. I'm curious about false. I want to know what happens if I say false is the answer here. I don't know if absolute truth exists. False. Okay. This looks about the same as the other page, doesn't it? Absolute truth exists. Absolute truth does not exist. I don't know if absolute truth exists, and I am not going to touch this button because I think it'll send me to Disneyland. This is not a glitch. Think about it. Okay, so if I believe absolutely that I don't know if absolute truth exists, then I've got an absolute truth right. Right. So if it's false that I think that absolute truth, that I don't know if absolute truth exists, then I must know whether absolute truth exists or not, right? If it's false that I don't know, then I must know. Okay, so I guess these are our only two options left then. So does absolute truth exist? Well, I absolutely did not know if absolute truth exists. Or does absolute truth not exist? Well, let's go ahead and go with this one, just to see what it is, because I'm leaning towards this one, but I want to go ahead and see what happens if I click this button. Absolute truth does not exist. Absolutely true or okay, so I'm seeing the same answers again. Absolutely true or false. Absolute truth does not exist. So this question is a little bit trickier than the last one because what I believe is personal to me, right? If we go back in time and try to see who and ask someone, is it true that in the future some girl will not know what absolute truth is? They may not be able to tell you because they don't know who the some girl is or why anyone would believe that. So that truth may not carry to someone else, possibly, you could argue. But now we're talking about a more universal truth, right? Absolute truth does not exist. We're saying absolute truth for anybody, at any place, in any time does not exist. Is that absolutely true? So for everybody, at any place, in any time, it is absolutely true that absolute truth does not exist. We got a contradiction here, don't we? So it is not absolutely true that absolute truth does not exist? Huh. So that's confusing. So for some people, absolute truth might exist, but that's in opposition to the definition also, because absolute truth has to influence everybody. So the only there is no coherent answer on this page here. So let's go ahead and pick false and see what that does. Okay, so we're back at this page because at least for some people, absolute truth must exist. But if absolute truth exists for some people and it's absolute truth for all people at all times, in all places, then it has to exist for all people. If absolute truth exists for some people, it must exist for all people. So I guess the answer is absolute truth exists. Okay. So knowledge, okay. I know something to be true, or I don't know anything to be true. And this is something that I've seen on the video of this website's creator. His first name is Sai. His last name is difficult to pronounce. I could show off and pronounce it, but I'm not going to show off. So the creator of this resource is Sai. And he often, when he's talking to other people, one of the questions he wants to ask them immediately is it possible that everything you believe to be true could be false? And he may get some people who are really humble and said, yeah, absolutely, I could be a brain in a jar. Everything I believe to be true could be false. And then he'll get some people who say, no, there's got to be something I believe that's going to be true. So here's that question. This is what he's asking us. I know something to be true, or I don't know anything to be true. We just decided that absolute truth exists, right? So I think this is my answer, but I'm going to lean towards the answer that is not mine. I want to just explore all my options here. So let me be humble and say I don't know anything to be true. I don't know anything to be true. True or false? Okay, so we're getting used to this reasoning, I think. So if I know that I don't know anything to be true, then there's something I hold to be true. So that's a contradiction. So it's false that I don't know anything to be true. So at least there's at least one thing that I know to be true, which is kind of comfort. I kind of like knowing a thing. So let's say I don't know that it's going to matter which button I choose here. I'll go ahead and choose false. When you come to the website, I'll let you choose the right answer on the first time. So it's false that I don't know something to be true. We're back here at knowledge 2. This is not a glitch. Think about it. So it is, I know something to be true. I guess I do, because I thought that I didn't know anything to be true, but now I know that that's got to be false. So I know something to be true, whatever that is. So logic. Question. Logic exists. Logic does not exist. We get a little more information here, don't we? You have acknowledged that absolute truth exists and that you know some things to be true. The next step toward the proof that God exists is to determine whether you believe that logic exists. Logical proof would be irrelevant to someone who denies that logic exists. Well, that makes sense. An example of the law of logic is the law of non-contradiction. This law states, for instance, that it cannot be both true that my car is in the parking lot and it is not in the parking lot at the same time and in the same way. Okay. So we've got a law of logic. Does the law of logic hold any weight? Is logic a means to determine truth? Let's go with the answer that's counterintuitive to me. Let's say that logic does not exist. Let's see what happens here. Logic does not exist. I used logic to conclude that logic does not exist, or I came to my conclusion about logic arbitrarily. One interesting thing about denying logic is that since you don't believe in logic, you actually do believe in logic. If there were not logic, then you could have no problem with that contradiction. Okay, so he talked about the law of non-contradiction. One thing cannot be both itself and not itself in the same way at the same time. So if you don't believe in logic, then you have no problem with the contradiction of someone claiming you do believe in logic. That's interesting. Well, based on this, I probably do believe that, did use logic to conclude that logic does not exist. I know actually I picked the button that I thought was logically incoherent. So I'll say I came to my conclusion about logic arbitrarily. Logic exists. Logic does not exist. This is not a glitch. Think about it. If you came to your conclusion about logic arbitrarily, the next time you may arbitrarily choose that logic exists and continue with the proof. Okay. I think he's trying to avoid sending us to Disneyland. I think that's what he's doing. If you don't believe that logic exists, then being arbitrary is the most reasonable thing you can do. The question is whether the most reasonable thing you can do, assuming logic doesn't exist, would actually lead you to the truth. Clearly, there would be no contradiction, so clicking one button is like the other. I don't want to go through the whole cycle again that we just went through, so I'll say that logic exists. And just based on personal experience, as I look at choices that we make in life, I find that logic tends to lead toward truth. I see that among humanity around me, the ones who succeed most are the logical ones, the reasonable ones. We've built an entire society on the back of logic. So personally, I do truly believe that logic is a tool to get to the truth. It may not get us all the way there by itself, but it is a reliable tool for determining truth versus falsehood. So I would be on the side of logic anyway, and you can't make an argument against logic unless you use logic. So we run into the same contradictions that we were facing at the beginning of this cycle. So I feel like his last argument was kind of arbitrary because he's talking to someone who is arbitrary in their thinking, is not using logic. So for him to use a logical example would actually shoot himself in the foot with someone who doesn't believe in logic, right? So I think he used the best argument for the type of person who doesn't believe that logic exists. I find it to be weak since I do believe that logic exists. So I'm giving you the logical example that he did not give us at the moment. So let's find out, is logic universal? Is logic universal, or is it person relative? So to reach this step, you have acknowledged that there is absolute truth, that you know some things to be true, and that logic exists. Now let's see what you believe about logic. Is it universal or up to the individual? Are contradictions invalid where you are and only because you say they are? Or is this universally true? So this is where I think we start getting into interesting territory, because I think up to this point, my nose itches. I blew it earlier and now I feel like I've got Kleenex particles on my nose, so I apologize for scratching my nose on video. But so we have logic is universal, logic is person relative. I think the steps up to this point have kind of been shooting at postmodernism, right? Where postmodernism says we can't know what truth is or if it even exists based on our perceptions. Our perceptions prevent us from knowing actual truth. So the questions that we've led up to at this point says actually we do believe in truth. We know a thing to be true. So it is possible to get beyond our perceptions to reality. We know at least a thing. And now we're trying to figure out how we know what we know. So postmodernism is dead by this point. But now we're talking about, is logic universal or person relative? So does truth cohere only with my personal beliefs? Is truth required to be pragmatic? And of course, I don't know that necessarily is covered here. So this one I think is dealing with coherence theory. Is truth only aligned with my personal beliefs? If someone else has different beliefs, then what's true for me would not be true for them. So is it universal or person relative? So let me pretend that I believe coherence theory, and I'm going to say it's person relative. Okay, logic is person relative. If you believe, let's look at our answers. Logic is universal. Logic is universal. Okay. If you believe that logic is relative, then you don't. If logic does not apply universally, then it doesn't necessarily apply to this website. Okay. And you could have no problem with any contradictions like the above. So they're saying, well, maybe For you, it's true that logic is person relative. But if it's person relative, it could be true only for you, right? Everybody else, it might be true that it's universal. Okay, so the question that's running in the back of my mind here, if logic is not, like if I hold logic to be person relative, and that means that to somebody else logic is universal, and if that's true, then their logic being universal applies to me also, because they hold the truth that logic is universal. So then that bleeds over onto me, that overpowers my belief that logic is person relative. So my belief that logic is person relative must be false, because it is true to someone else that logic is universal. So it makes sense to me. I don't know if it'll make sense to you, but I don't know that it matters which button we're going to choose. I've been choosing the left one usually. I'm going to choose the right one this time. So logic unchanging. Logic does not change. Logic changes. To reach this step, you have acknowledged that there is absolute truth, that you know some things to be true, that logic exists, and that it is universal. The next question is, does logic change? So here's how we get to pragmatism. Because like I mentioned, there are times maybe that a belief would change in pragmatic value, would be more or less useful than at other times. So does logic ever change? Let's go ahead and say that it does. Let's be the pragmatist and say that it changes. So logic does not change. Okay, we're back here again. Both identical questions. Keep in mind the question is not whether our perception of logic changes, but whether or not logic itself can change. If you believe that logic changes, then for all you know, logic has changed and contradictions are now valid. In that case, you could have no problem with contradictions like the one above. So by now we've come to the agreement that logic exists, including the law of non-contradiction. I have never personally experienced that law to ever change. I don't think it would be a law if it did ever change. And it's been a law since at least the time of Aristotle, if I'm understanding correctly. So actually, I do believe that logic does not change, and he's pulling an argument kind of like the arbitrary one. If you believe that logic does not change, well, then there is no standing rule of logic that he can use to convince you, but he can suggest that maybe logic has changed. If there is a point in time where logic would change, then these would be valid, which would make it true that logic... So again, that kind of bleeds over, kind of like the personal relativity example. The other person's belief that it was universal bleeds over and invalidates personal relativity of truth. I think this is a case where if logic were to change... Yeah, it's confusing. There is a point where you reach absurdity when you're trying to hold a position that's illogical. I think that's where I'm landing now. I've seen it when he asks people, is it possible that everything you know to be true could be false? And then he follows that up with, do you know that to be true? So either you say, yes, I know that to be true, or even that is false, if you want to double down on your belief that everything you know to be true could be false. And then you wind up in this realm of absurdity where you can't even communicate anymore because there is no, you'd have to see the video. He does it very well in the video. It's one of his favorite arguments. Sometimes he gets annoying about it, but I think he's got validity. So I encourage you, if you have the time, the top video on his homepage, proofThatGodExists.org, is an hour and a half long. I don't know that you have to watch the whole thing to get the sense of what I'm seeing with the argument here, but I think my brain is spinning into absurdity concerning whether or not logic could change. That is a bad sign, so let's go with logic does not change. Logic, immaterial. Logic is not made of matter, or logic is made of matter. To reach this step, you have acknowledged that there is absolute truth, that you know some things to be true, that logic exists, and that it is universal and unchanging. The next question is whether you believe that logic is material or immaterial. In other words, is logic made of matter, or is it an abstract entity? So I think this gets at the theory of evolution, because from what I understand, I'm a creationist. I believe that the earth is only a few thousand years old. I don't believe, well, several thousand years old. I don't believe that it's billions of years old. So I would believe that logic is an immaterial property that God has built, has structured reality upon. But if you believe that matter came together randomly over billions of years, at first there was not life, and then chemical reactions occurred that sparked life in some matter, and then you start to get germs that evolve into fish, that evolve into lizards, and so on, then, well, logic isn't really, you can't have an abstract logic. Logic ultimately comes down to matter, because our ability to reason is all based on matter, is all based on those electrical impulses that are being made by chemical processes in this material body that we're holding. So we're getting down to, is the world created based on logic, or is logic a property of the world, of the material world? So let me pretend that I'm an evolutionist, that I believe that everything is strictly matter. Logic is made of matter. Matter changes, matter does not change. What do you believe? Well, the first example that comes to me is water. Water does change from, of course, liquid to solid and maybe to gas, depending on the circumstances. So intuitively, I would click this one. Maybe you want to get to the nitty-gritty of science and talk about atoms and quarks and things. Maybe someone who knows science a little bit better than I do would be able to argue that matter does not change. So let's hit this one. Seriously? Okay. If you believe matter does not change, there is no point in continuing. You would have to believe that you are never going to die. In that case, need more help than this site can offer. Repent while you still can. So this is this is the kind of rhetorical style that Sci is definitely capable of. I think I would be a little bit softer about my approach. Let's consider one thing, though. If matter does not change, then for logic to evolve as a property of matter, then, and for matter to not change, I mean, at the beginning of the universe, you have the Big Bang. There was, I don't know what the explanation for the Big Bang is. Why is there something rather than nothing? I think there is a theory that there, on the quantum level, there was a cosmic vacuum. I don't hold to it because I believe nothing is actually no thing. So a quantum vacuum would be something. So I'm going in way beyond my depth to reach for a theory behind the Big Bang. So let's assume the Big Bang exists. Material particles come into existence and they start to interact with one another. But if they never changed, then they would never expand into the living creatures that we are with rationality to process logic. So really, even in order to hold the view that logic is a property of matter that evolved over time, you have to believe that things evolve and that matter changes. So yeah, this is a self-contradiction to believe that logic is a property of matter and that matter never changes. So I'm pretty sure this button takes us to Disneyland. I don't know. You can test that if you want to. I'm going back. We're going to say matter changes. Okay, so logic is not made of matter, or logic is made of matter. To reach this step, you admitted that logic does not change and that matter changes. Therefore, it follows that you do not believe that logic is made of matter. Please try again. Okay, that makes sense, especially since we exist that logic, we agree that logic exists. And so we are now bound to the law of non-contradiction. So we're going to say logic is not made of matter. So the proof that God exists. To reach this step, you must have admitted that truth exists and that you know things to be true, that logic exists and it is universal, not made of matter, and does not change. So now this button takes us into the website. Now, I'll go ahead and show you his argument here, his discussion here. Truth, knowledge, and logic are all necessary to prove anything, and you assumed and admitted to all of them by reaching this truth. The true proof that God exists is that without him you couldn't prove anything. Okay. While you may try to account for truth, knowledge, and logic without God, the rest of this site will expose your inability to do so and the Christian's justification for them with God. While this proof is a valid transcendental proof, in other words, one that deals in necessary preconditions, no one needs this proof. The Bible teaches us that there are two types of people in the world: those who profess the truth of God's existence and those who suppress the truth of God's existence. The options of seeking God or not believing in God are unavailable. So based on the Bible, it's not possible that you've not yet found God. The knowledge of God is a part of every one of us. God gives that to us from the time that we come into existence into this world. The Bible never attempts to prove the existence of God, as it declares that those who deny him are without excuse for suppressing what he has already revealed to them. Romans 1:8-21 says, "The wrath of God is being revealed from heaven against all the godlessness and wickedness of men who suppress the truth by their wickedness, since what may be known about God is plain to them, because God has made it plain to them. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that men are without excuse. For although they knew God, they neither glorified him as God nor gave thanks to him, but their thinking became futile and their foolish hearts were darkened. God does not send people to hell for denying what they do not know, but for sin against the God that they do know." So that is why I was tempted to pause at the last page and say, you click the button yourself and see what's behind here, because this page is not actually a proof that God exists. It's an assertion that you already know that God exists. Now you can click the next button. He has... Okay, we have a little step more. If you click this button, you go into the rest of the website to this question and answers section, which will encourage you to go take the quiz, but it'll also have questions and answers for you. I think that gets down to the proof that God exists a lot more. Let's see. Note the proof does not say that unprofessed believers do not prove things. The argue is that you must borrow from the Christian worldview and that God who makes universal, immaterial, invariant laws possible in order to prove anything. I'll get into that a little bit more in a moment. This type of logical proof deals with transcendentals or necessary starting points and is called a transcendental proof. Any contrary view to the God of Christianity being the necessary starting point for rationality is reduced to absurdity. You have to assume God in order to argue against him. Let's say that we don't quite follow this logic. We're not quite understanding things the way that he understands them. And so let's say that we say, I do not believe that God exists. Okay, I think this will take us back to Disneyland. Denying belief in God is not unbelief, but professed unbelief, an exercise in self-deception. You may know things, but you cannot account for anything you claim to know, which we covered in the last video, right? Even logic doesn't get us fully to an understanding of what it is we know. Because we don't know whether our premises are all true. We don't know that we've accounted for all the variables that could derail our logic. And so logic is a great tool for determining something to be true or untrue, but it doesn't really take us to the truth all by itself. Arguing against God's existence would be on par with arguing against the existence of air, breathing it all the while. You admit that absolute truth exists, but cannot account for it without God. You claim to know things to be true, but cannot justify knowledge or truth according to your own worldview. You use universal, immaterial, unchanging logic in order to come to rational decisions, but you cannot account for it. Truth, knowledge, and logic are not the only ways God has revealed himself to you, but they are sufficient to show the irrationality of your thinking and expose your guilt for denying him. So I think he's getting a bit pointed here, and for good reason. He believes the Bible, and the Bible says that everybody knows God to exist, that when people say God does not exist, they are suppressing the truth. They are actually lying against what they truly should understand to be true, that they truly do understand to be true. It is common to every human belief to understand God's existence, and then we have to fight that in order to claim that God does not exist. So then we are actually lying. It's not just that we're mistaken. So Psi does tend to get pointed against people who go through the steps and don't admit the existence of God. It makes sense based on the biblical belief that everyone truly does know of God's existence. They're just suppressing that knowledge within themselves. So there's a side of me. I don't know if it's because I'm a gal and we tend to think more relationally, or if it's because I'm a little bit a little bit weaker than Psi. There's a side of me that recognizes someone reading through these passages is going to feel pretty insulted. I think his goal would be that if you're feeling insulted, maybe that would stick. Maybe you would give some consideration to why what he says is true or isn't true, and whether your beliefs are consistent. Because we've come all this way. We've knocked down postmodernism. We've knocked down coherence theory. We've knocked down pragmatic theory. So the only coherent, logical approach to truth is to believe that truth must correspond with reality. Unless there's some theory I don't know about. If you know about one, please let me know in the comments. So we're down to one way of looking at truth, and through that lens of looking at truth, as I showed yesterday, there is no human way to know what truth is. We can't know through our senses. We can't know through our logic. We can't know through the authority of other human beings. We have to take our authority from a source that is omniscient, honest, unable to be fooled, is capable of communicating that truth to us. The only source like that would be a mind that is not a human mind, because us humans are so limited. So this all seems to be coming down to what Psi is saying here. He says there's a reason that you deny the existence of God, and it has nothing to do with proof. I can show this to you. Examine what your initial reaction was to the proof of God's existence offered on this website. Do you think that you could continue to deny God because you are not a scientist or philosopher, but surely somewhere, sometime, a philosopher or a scientist will come up with an explanation of truth, knowledge, and logic apart from God? Did you try to come up with an alternate explanation of your own, or did you even consider that the proof was valid? So I think he's got a good point here. If you're, by the time we get to this page, we're saying, I believe logic exists and is universal, but I still don't believe that God exists. I think if we go behind the I believe that God exists button, then we'll get closer to a better explanation of the proof. I've done my best to explain it up to this point for you, so that you'll be able to get behind that button. If you're saying logic universally exists, and the only way that I can grasp it, that there is no good way, no human way that I can grasp it, but I still don't believe in God, then you are holding out for a different answer. You're not willing to accept the evidence in front of you that logic is universal and must come from somewhere universal, immaterial, unchanging. So how come you're holding out? Why aren't you looking at the evidence? And so that's where I think he gets pointed, is if you've come to this page, then you've got the evidence in front of you and you're refusing to look at it. Hoping that an alternate explanation for truth, knowledge, and universal, immaterial, unchanging logic can someday be found apart from God is a blind leap of faith or wishful thinking. Isn't it interesting that this is exactly what professed unbelievers say about Christians? I think that's interesting. My name is Faith. I kind of have a strong opinion about the idea that faith is blind. So I'm behind him on that paragraph. Please examine the real reason that you are running from God. It is my prayer that God will open your eyes and change your heart so that you may be saved from your sin embraced by his forgiving love in the person of Jesus Christ, and come to know the peace which passes all understanding. So let's go back. Let's just make sure there's some meat on this website besides the quiz. We'll say that we believe that God exists. Okay, so we come to a page that has information. It has questions that you can have answered. Let's see, there was one that I liked here. By what authority do Christians claim the Bible as their ultimate authority? Is that the question I'm looking for? I think so. So you open it, you see this article here. I'm just going to boil this down. I'm not going to read the entire content, but what I liked about this article, he mentions that if we say that the Bible is our ultimate authority for truth, people want us to tell you what, I'm not going to sit on the site anymore. You can explore it at your leisure. So I'm going to go to, I've heard other streamers call this big head mode, so we're going to full screen. But by what authority do Christians claim the Bible as their ultimate authority? Once us Christians say, I believe the Bible is true because it says it's true, and the Bible is the basis for truth, that is my ultimate authority for truth, then people naturally want to say, well, how do you know that the Bible is true? Well, the Christian answer is, well, the Bible says that it's true. And people don't like that answer because then it seems circular, right? And that is taken to be a logical fallacy. In many cases, it is a logical fallacy. When it, but the point made in the section that I'm referring to is, let me ask you what your standard for ultimate truth would be. Let's assume you're like me and you believe that truth corresponds to reality and that logic is a tool that we can use to come to the truth. Of course, you recognize you're limited by your ability to process that logic with your reasoning capability. So you say, my own reason is my ultimate standard for truth. Let's say somebody else comes along and says, well, how do you know that your own reason is true? And you say, well, because I've incorporated scientific principles into my reasoning and I'm trying to use the laws of logic. Well, now you're talking about two other authorities. Your reason is not your ultimate authority to truth anymore. Now you're relying on science and logic. So, but how do you know that, say, logic is a reliable standard for truth? Well, logically it is. Well, now we're getting into circular reasoning. Or I think you'll be hard-pressed to find a standard higher than logic for determining truth, which is why this website goes to logic to make its argument for truth actually coming from God, because logic by itself kind of falls flat. Again, like I say, you have to know that every one of your premises or every piece of evidence or whatever is incorporated into your logic, you have to account for all of those before you can know that your conclusion is going to be true. And so logic sometimes fails when you don't have all of the knowledge necessary to vet your information. The only way that we can truly know that logic is true is if we have omniscience. And us humans don't have omniscience, but there is a being that does have omniscience. His name is God, and thankfully he has communicated truth to us through what? The Bible. So if logic is the highest standard of truth, and we're trying to vet whether logic is true or not, either we have to stop with the circular reasoning that logic is true, or there's not much more a much higher standard of logic above logic than God himself. If you find another standard that you'd like to use, I'd love to hear about that in the comments. So no matter what your ultimate standard of truth is, you're going to reach a level where you have to be circular, because your ultimate standard has to vet itself. There is nothing higher than to vet it. So that's where as Christians find ourselves. We take the Bible to be our ultimate standard of truth. I would word it more that we take God to be the ultimate standard of truth, and God wrote the Bible. The Bible is God's word. Therefore, the only way that we have to know God is to read the Bible, and then we know truth based on God's word. So that's how I would express that. So I found that interesting. Hopefully that thought was sufficiently meaty for you to go back to the site and make your way through the quiz, or maybe take the shortcut in the sidebar and discover what other meat is on the site, because Psych does get pointed at times, but I think he's got a lot of good thoughts. So if you're interested in this kind of thing, I'd encourage you to go to proofthatgodexists.org, not .com, proofthatgodexists.org, and check it out for yourself. And that's it for tonight. God bless you.